Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Zoning Review Committee meeting of December 12th, 2023. This meeting is being conducted remotely online through the Zoom meeting app, and public participation is encouraged through the app or by phone. This is in accordance with the extension of COVID pandemic provisions, allowing remote public meetings by the General Court through March 31st, 2025, per Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. So we still are waiting for a couple of members to join, but we did want to get started. And first on the agenda is a summary of the MBTA community's information sessions, which were held on November 8th and 4th. And we got some feedback from those, so I will turn this over to Eric and Mike to sum up what we have, and then we can sort of review the zoning bylaw language.
Sure, thank you. As you mentioned, our second information session was held last week on December 4th. It was on a different night of the week. It was on a Monday night. We did have some additional folks come out to listen to the presentation. We had a little bit more of an informal discussion. We did go through most of the slides I conveyed to some folks that attended the first information session at the Zoning Review Committee, had a discussion about whether or not there was enough appropriate short-term development opportunities, and that the Zoning Review Committee felt pretty steadfast with regards to having taken everything into consideration, and we're not planning to make any changes to the district boundaries. The group seemed to accept that perfectly fine. I did help point out to them that I think one of the most important components of that decision is that the district that is at the parking lot area offers obviously the short-term development opportunity. And for members of the community that felt like that wasn't enough, if and when any development takes place there, that the community is open for communication and ideas with regards to additional zoning, and it gives the community the opportunity to come up with zoning language and density that they see fit, rather than the density and zoning and regulations that the state has mandated under this legislation, which I think they appreciated as well. Although it might prolong the process, I think they understood the value of the Zoning Review Committee's perspective on that. The discussion that was that took place there, we went a little bit off topic when we were there. Some folks wanted to talk a little bit more about some economic development, and they're tangential with multifamily housing development. One of the reasons why the committee mentioned or has supported a district area up near the mall is because it provides an economic development opportunity to support the commercial and retail districts that are up there. So with that said, it was sort of a natural progression into giving them an update with regards to what was being developed and where, just so that they had a better understanding of, the relationship between multifamily housing in any non-residential one district and the future development projects that are currently expected to take place. And we covered areas like the warehouse that's behind Olive Garden. We covered the warehouse on Kendall Road. We talked a little bit about Flint's Corner. We've talked about, well, that was pretty much the major areas that we spoke about. Right. But that was pretty much it on the information session.
All right, thank you. Let's review the language from the zoning bylaw. I know, Eric, I had talked to you yesterday about some things, and we have
Right
notes over this too. So you want me to run through those, or do you want to?
I think it'll be, since I took notes on all the comments that you had provided, I think it makes sense to go through them one by one. But before I do that, I just wanted to double check to see if Eric or Joe, and let me bring over Larry Clausen. Sorry, I just noticed that he had joined, promoting him to panelist, to see if there were any other committee members that had brought comments or anything else based on their review of the draft of that zoning language that they'd like me to incorporate, so that when I go through it, we can do it in order.
So the only question I had was, Mr. Chair, if I might.
Yeah.
So this draft language, we created this with NEMCOG. Did we have our council review this? I'm just because some of the sections in there, there's references to other items. We just normally do that. And I don't know that's a requirement to do that where this is in draft form. I just wanted to see if that had been done.
No, it hasn't. I think that it's probably best to have the legal and compliance review done at the state level first, in terms of like getting the best use, because obviously we have town council on retainer, but his hours are logged. So I think if we're going to be getting a review of this, it's best to have the state do it first before putting it through town council, because they're going to have to do it again before town meeting. So, and it's not going to take them that much less time if they did it now and again at town meeting. So I didn't think there was any liability or extreme risk there of not putting it through town council first.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I don't think there's risk associated with it. I just was trying to understand the logistics of when we do that. Just because there are little nuances and where it does go in front of town meeting, I do want to make sure that our town council is there, because I know that the AG won't be there at our town meeting if questions come up.
Understood. And I'd like to point out to the chair that Mike also has his hand up to participate.
Yes, Mike.
Yeah, it is about, I would say probably 99% of the of the text is from the state model bylaw. So it should be, there isn't anything that really concerns me, but yeah, it's never a bad idea to have council go through it. But probably, like Garrick said, I would probably wait more towards the end of the process.
Yeah, because we're also kind of up against the wall time-wise. We need to get this over them so that they have the 90-day review, right, and get it back to us. And if there are any things that needs to be changed at that point, they'll still give us a little bit of an opportunity to do that before we send it to our town council. And then does it have to go back again for a quick touch-up before town meeting, or are we good to go after they've gone over it?
I would say that if we're optimistic that we're only going to, we'll either get 0 comments or some comments that are easily incorporated or taken care of. Currently, the state's not offering or requiring communities to send it back to them for another review before being presented to town meeting. However, they do have an open door policy. So if there's specific questions and things like that, it's not like staff cannot get them answered before the language is finalized for town meeting. So it should be a little bit faster.
If there was some kind of language that they didn't like, they would maybe give us some sort of an assessment or change the language or make suggestions, or do they just say, no, this isn't good?
Well, I mean, as you know, I can't speak for exactly how they're going to provide the feedback. All of us are hoping that it's more prescriptive, so that it's easier to incorporate changes that are compliant or that they deem compliant versus just flagging something and say, fix this. And we don't really know exactly what they mean. So I'm fairly confident that they're going to be providing us with as the best guidance possible so that we can provide a revision for town meeting that meets their requirements. They're not interested in making this job any harder than it already is, despite appearances.
Okay.
And my conversation.
Yeah, is that your assessment too, Mike?
Yeah, I've been in contact with EOHLC throughout the process with their biweekly office hours. And they're going to try and give you as an itemized list of corrections to make, because they're trying to get you to have a compliant bylaw, and also it's going to help them in their secondary review if they have a detailed notes on what they need to what the community needs to amend.
Great. All right. Well, back to you then, Eric. Why don't you pick it up? And as we're going through this, if anybody has any comments or something they want to throw in, by all means.
Sure.
Right in.
We're clarifying a section on, there's no comments really up until part C, definitions, number 12, section 3A, and what it's defining. It's basically, it's obviously the section 3A of Mass General Law, chapter 40A, also known as the Zoning Act. We're going to clarify that. Let's see here, scrolling down. There were some questions about whether the bicycle storage items 2 and 3 were
You want to bring your screen up, Eric, so we can kind of follow along, and the folks at home.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, hang on just a minute. All right, does
Good.
that work?
That's perfect. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Let's move this out of the way. Okay. All right, so, and, you know, I flagged these, Mike went through the comments and answered those and pointed out that, on number 2, the number of bicycle parking spaces, one space per dwelling unit was for, numbers of covered. Number 2 and 3 is 3, it's covered, and 2, it's just, so I would disagree with you, Mike, in that your answer that number 2 is a standard bike rack. It does say the number of covered bicycle storage spaces in
Oh,
that definition. So I'm not sure if we need to remove that or come up with some sort of consolidation.
yeah, I see how that's confusing. Yeah,
Personally,
I
I
don't.
think that we could probably combine them and list it at, you know, at least one space per dwelling unit, if that was going to be what took place.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And the separation in these within these two, you know, in the model ordinance, the covered bike storing, it was supposed to be within the building, and then it was that there was usually like a larger I think it was like 20 units or as the threshold there, where we have in the number of bike spaces on 2, that could have related to more of like the smaller projects, but where we have the threshold of 8 units for any development within these districts, you know, I think just consolidating it into one is fine.
Okay, so in terms of the committee, and I'm kind of curious to get Mike's perspective on this from a regional perspective, like what other communities might be looking at. Do folks feel like one bicycle space per dwelling unit is too many, or perfectly appropriate?
For our community, it's probably overkill. And I guess so the parking spaces is number 2, and then the bicycle storage is number 3. So one is, you know, just a place for you to put your bike. It could be an outside bike rack or whatever it is. Whereas the bicycle storage is a place to keep it inside in the snow and that. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah.
In which case the one space for 5 residential units for storage seems reasonable, but then having 5 times as many in the spaces, it to me, I was looking at it by saying that seems like it's overkill. And I don't know what other communities do. And while we certainly have bicyclists, and Larry would probably weigh in better than I would relative to that, but that just seems high.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Eric. I think it's high too. Is it, Mike, is this language from the state? And are they making these recommendations?
Yeah. You know, and you know, a lot of there's draft bylaw is kind of transit oriented, development minded. So I think that's, you know, why you're seeing more most communities, you know, they're trying to either locate it near transit, or it's in a kind of an established district, where our districts are this is more kind of you know, larger lots, you know, off of Route 3A. It's going to be tough to really get around, you know, in these areas with on bicycle.
So I'm just curious, Mr. Chair, do you want to ask the group if removing item 2 and adjusting item 3 to be one space per 4 residential dwelling units, since it's an evenly divisible number by the expected 8 units because that's our minimum. Does that make sense?
I'll say yes, but I'm also thinking, yeah, for eight units, 2 bike spots. Figure we're gonna have per acre. We would probably maybe need 8 spots or something like that. Yeah, okay. If we had 4 buildings of 8 units each.
I mean, if you've got covered bike parking, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean somebody's going to be using it for transportation directly out of the development, right? So, I mean, people could live there and still use that area to store their bikes and then still attach it to their car and go somewhere, I suppose.
I agree.
Just in terms of convenience, but it's just
That's
a
a good
matter
point.
of whether that needs to be, do you need to mandate that? Maybe it would be up to the developer to determine if that's an amenity that their target market needs or wants.
Well, we're asking for a minimum. So I guess that
Right.
brings us back to what would we want the minimum to be?
Mhm.
And depending on the development, we could ask for more at that point. So I'm thinking 1 per 4, is that all right with the committee?
Before you settle on that, Mr. Chairman, I have
Yeah, absolutely,
a
please,
moment.
Joe. Yep.
We're talking about standard bicycles right now, for storage and parking. Is the state going to mandate any specifics for e-bikes so that charging is available for e-bikes? Right now, NYPD is not recommending charging e-bikes inside residential dwellings or apartments. So should there be another category for e-bikes, or can it be incorporated into these paragraphs?
I would probably want to take a look at some other draft language on how that's written up.
Okay.
Relative
always-
to that, I mean, does it need to be in this bylaw? Because, and by the way, you have an inconsistency. You got the word 5 and then the number 4 on number 2. But should we, I think, Joe, to your point, should we have a bylaw relative to the entire town to not have e-bikes being charged within the dwelling? Because, my concern would be, yeah, we have it covered here, but then we don't have it covered in the rest of our bylaws. And if the state's not going to mandate some of these things, I would think we'd want to go as simple as possible in this bylaw to have it focus in on the dwelling. Now, with that said, I think we have to make sure that we have enough in here so that we have the control that we need in the site plan review, because this is as right. So I don't know when we could put that e-bike restriction in the regular bylaws and whether that's what we'd want to do. But if the suggestion was to put it in here, just to make sure we're covered, and then get it, across the board in the town, that would be fine too. I'm fine with the 4 units, by the way. I mean, 1 per 4. I think having in multiples of 4 and, divisible, the 4 and the 8, as we had done, I think having that consistency certainly would help the developer.
Yeah, let's kick the can down the road on this one. I think that at some point we're gonna be mandated to do EV charging stations per unit or something like that. And we can probably incorporate the bike charging stations in with that at the same time. I've been reading the stretch codes and I don't see anything about bicycle charging stations in there, just car charging stations. So, but if a bike is an electric vehicle, then we're kind of covered that way, I guess.
I will just say this one thing is, as far as bikes go, people that, really use bikes for commuting, my son, for example, who commutes from here to Lexington, actually a couple times a week still on a bicycle, those bikes get expensive and they're going to wind up inside the home most likely. those are like, if you're really using these things to commute a distance, they're not going to be left outside. The people who own them just won't leave them outside.
Good point. Thank you. All right, so we'll go to that language then, everyone. Yes? Okay,
Yes. Yeah, therefore, yes. Otherwise, it should be higher, but yeah, 1 per 4 is probably more than adequate.
all right, so the next section down then would be the highlighted number 4. So in researching the stretch codes today, stretch codes R404.4 says it's 20% of,
Yep.
so we should make that to be 20% rather than 20 parking spaces.
Actually, I did bring up a question about that with a couple of other communities on a call today.
Yeah.
And several of those communities, because it's already in the stretch code, just eliminated it because it's already covered. Which I think is fine. There's no reason to duplicate it, because if the number goes up in the code, then you got to update your zoning bylaw.
Okay, yeah, then let's eliminate this altogether then.
Yep.
Okay, good.
All right, scrolling down. Mike had responded to the comments that decomposed granite, which is essentially like a crushed stone material, if it's used or allowed to be used on a parking surface, does that raise concerns for plowing and, keeping a site, tidy and things like that? Since Mike's already written his comment, I'll read it here. His only reservation about removing that is that pavers and brick can be utilized as a low impact development feature of a stormwater management system. So it, the parking surface may be concrete, asphalt, decomposed granite, bricks, or pavers, pervious materials, etc. I think that if you're going to be doing a site plan review and somebody's utilized decomposed granite in an area that the planning board deems inappropriate or a problem, I think it's something that can be either negotiated or discussed. It's possible that you have a developer that pushes back really hard and says, well, this is, it already says it's allowed, you can't really deny what we're doing here. It's really up to the folks that are going to be operating or own that area that's going to have to deal with it versus an area that's probably going to be, it's not going to be maintained by the town because it's going to be a private parking area.
Anybody on the board have any comments? Taking that out was my thought, but
I mean, I will,
Like-
although we're potentially imagining really large areas, some places utilize that material right within a driveway. I didn't think of this when we were having our discussion, Chaz, but there's some areas where in order to keep the impervious areas down, if somebody's going to have a driveway, they'll make their driveway out of that material, and folks just keep it neat in that way. Some communities up in Maine that I'm aware of actually require it.
Yeah. I don't think we've seen it during my time on the planning board, but it's up to everybody else. If we want to leave that in, leave it in. If we want to take it out, we can take it out. My concern was plowing specifically, that the crushed stone or the decomposed granite would get pushed out. Same thing with the bricks and the pavers. I know even having granite curbs along the side of the road is tough to maintain. If a plow hits one of those, it just buckles up, and it just looks to me as though that would be something that would be more expensive to maintain over the concrete or the asphalt. So those were my thoughts. Whatever the board wants to do, I'm fine with. So,
Mr. Chair, is the concern that some of this material would end up on the roads that we are responsible for? Because I mean, I certainly understand. I agree with you. I wouldn't want to have that in where I lived in my HOA if I'm dealing with that. I would think that they would not want to go that route, but I certainly understand the explanation that Mike and Eric provided, relative to have it, you might have a place where the stormwater plan is a little bit more progressive and looks at things a little bit differently. But would this cause a problem with our roads, right? Where, okay, we have a location where this stuff is, they're using that, and could that cause a problem where that ends up, usually you're pushing it into there, so I would assume it wouldn't end up in our road, but that would probably be a situation where I could see where it would impact folks other than those in that development.
And anytime I've ever seen that stuff used anywhere, it always ends up all over the place anyway. Somebody hits the gas a little too hard turning in, sprays out a little bit onto the road. I don't think it's very good material for parking lots to begin with, so. Those are just my thoughts.
We use it at the Tyngsborough Town Beach, and it does wind up everywhere, and it is a hassle. And the beach is not plowed in the winter, which is one of the better things. And I think there was concern about water, and costs. So that's why it was used. So, well, I agree that it would be a problem. It seems like it wouldn't be the town's problem. It'd be more of the problem of the people that are using it. So I used to have it in our driveway here and walkway at my house, and we got rid of it in pretty short order after we moved in.
Do we have this restriction anywhere else in our bylaws? Or
It's
lack
not a
of
restriction, it's just an option.
I'm just trying to think of the downside of removing it, right? We could sit there and say, they could put that in part of the site plan review, that we think it's going to be there, where it's a small enough area, it's going to be it's a shoveled area, or whatever it is. Couldn't we agree to it in the site plan review? But we don't want people just doing it anyway. I'm wondering if the state would push back on that. I find it hard to believe that they would.
Yeah, I don't see that being an issue. I think if you're worried about it kind of being the decomposed granite being kind of promoted by this bylaw, I think if we just struck the decomposed granite there, it could potentially fall under including pervious materials, kind of that last catch-all.
I mean, adding it into the
Or
the area
well,
where
it could be, I think it could be considered, but not specifically allowed. And then at site plan review, the board can, the board can make their decision if they would, prefer something in other material. I'm sure you won't get too much pushback from the developer, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So just pull that out.
Yeah, let's just take that one out of there. I mean, well, as I said before, I've never seen anyone want to do that, so.
All right, thank you to the group. That brings us all the way down to section G, number 10 on waivers. This is language that basically provides some discretion to the planning board for site plan review to provide applicants with the opportunity to request waivers, but does not require the planning board to grant them. But it does provide them with the discretion to do so if they want it. The question was, the way it was originally written, does it infer something with regards to which requirements or all the requirements or some of the requirements that can be waived? The original language said that upon the request of the applicant and subject to compliance with the compliance guidelines, the site plan review authority may waive the requirements of this section, general development standards in the interests of design flexibility and overall project quality, and upon a finding of consistency of such variation with the overall purpose and objectives of this bylaw. And then Mike's reaction or suggestion to address that particular concern was removing the word the, which so that the authority may waive requirements. Instead of saying certain, instead of saying the, meaning which would be grouping them all together, we would just say may waive requirements. So I would accept, my recommendation is to just accept that deletion.
I like that much better.
All right. Ability for affordability, this requirement is applicable to all residential and mixed-use developments. Is there a reason why I wanted to remove mixed use, Mike?
I just don't really feel like it really needs to be there because it's just all residential developments with 8 or more units. It doesn't really, it won't be, it's not like you can have a mixed use development that had less than 8 units that it would trigger the applicability, if you know what I mean. It's
Sure. I guess my point would be, is there a developer who's going to get cute with the language saying, hey, this isn't just residential, we got mixed use, it's not applicable to us. I don't know. I know that's the type of question I might have gotten with regards to concern about, does removal of that language add a vulnerability to the community?
I think because it is, as long as the development has 8 units or more, regardless if it's mixed use or not, it's still applicable because of the 8 units.
I agree. Does anybody disagree?
I just think we're sensitive around that. So it might be that we're overly sensitive in it. I personally, it might be duplicative, but I don't see the problem with having it in there.
Okay.
That's the way I look at it. Because I'm with you, Eric. Just to be clear, it's like, okay, we don't want anybody getting cute. I mean, I think we're all in agreement and that's what it is. But with that, there's some sections in there where we sit there and go, yeah, we're a little sensitive to that one. Applicability would be that one.
Yeah, I don't think leaving it in causes any confusion. So
Yeah, that's
scrolling
good.
down, the provisions for affordable housing. I had made an adjustment that defined how the rounding would work. So that if you had a fractional unit that is, they didn't have a number of units that's evenly divisible by 8. If they had a fractional unit that was less than 1/2, then it would be rounded down, a normal standard rounding practice. And if it was greater than 1/2, it would be rounded up. And then Mike's point was that so long as it didn't result in a percentage above 10%, which I agree. It's just that I guess we would really want to say as long as it's not above 12.5%, right? Which I don't think would we come into that scenario. I guess it can't go over 12.5%. I think that was, yep. Now I remember a little bit more about some of the conversations that we had in like office hours with other folks about this in terms of why they were always rounding down. So let me just see if I can come up with a scenario. If you had 15 units being created, let's say 14 units being created, and we would say that you need 1 unit for every 12. So you'd be 1.1, that's not a good example. You'd have 15 divided by 16. Sorry, 15 divided by 12.
1 for every 8.
1 for every 8
because it's 12.5.
So we had 15 divided by
had-
8. So all right, so you'd have 1.875. So this would get rounded up to 2. So if you had 2 out of 15, you're now at 13.33%. And now you're not, you've exceeded the percentage that the state has deemed compliant. So we receive approval for our 12.5% request. this now violates that limit. And that's the rounding scenario that the state was warning communities about being wary of.
And Mr. Chair, so I think, Eric, when you talk about like that 14 units, right? That's a 14 or 15 units, whatever that is.
Mhm.
I could see the 14 unit, right? You sit there and say, all right, if I have 14 units that are there, then if I require 1.75, that rounds up to 2. And now I'm at a higher percentage in there at like, if I did my math, like 14.28 or whatever, 29. That's a higher percentage. That could be a problem. But on the flip side, if they round down, then I could have 14, but only 1. Um, you know, I get it that they don't want that to be a burden, but that's a choice that the developer is going to make when he tries to decide how many units he's going to build, which is why we suggested the 8, 1/8 anyway, because you're typically going to build them in 8s. Because the downside would be, all right, well, I'm just going to do 14 of them and I only have to do 1. And that's counter to what we want because that's below the 10%.
EOHLC's really struggled, I think, coming to grips with how to respond to this because of that predicament where you're gonna get more developments that are just under that threshold of triggering a unit, or because in a lot of cases that there are, in most communities that we're working with, they don't have a minimum unit count per project. So they could keep coming in with lower developments and then not triggering the affordability requirement.
Yeah, I mean, I hope I have the opportunity to share a perspective with EOHLC, because while they purport that this legislation is strictly a zoning, right? It's a requirement to zone for development. There has been language shared by the governor, by others, saying, well, production is important too. Well, if production is actually important, having it rounded up to the next whole number only encourages, the right number of units to be developed. So it's not gonna limit the ones that they're gonna create. So as long as you get up to that number, you say you might as well go all the way up to your whole number, and build all 16 or all 24 or whatever, versus oh, I'm gonna stop right at 14. Now I have less affordable housing as a percentage, and I have less total housing created, because of this limitation. So I would like, if we leave this in here the way it is, it does force the conversation that I could have with EOHLC and try to make that point to them. I know there's 177 other communities that they have to listen to, but I try to be as vocal as possible.
Your point, Eric, I mean, the state's trying to create more affordable housing. I think this is something that they would almost be looking for to make sure that
Right?
even though we're a little bit over what the 12.5% is in this specific case, I have to think that they would go along with it. In fact, in my phone call to you the other day, I had said, why don't we just make it any fraction gets rounded up? But you said that you didn't think that would fly, so.
Yeah, and so I totally agree. And I sort of understand that what they're afraid of is that towns will put it in there at the such high number that it's gonna prevent developers because they need to make their margins. And we get it. But I think it's important that if we were to say, look, we don't want to push it beyond 12.5. That's their choice based on the number of units that they have. But we can't get it, we can't have it go below 10, right? We don't want to have any of these things cutting into, putting us into jeopardy around 40B. So there does have to be some sort of reasonable expectation set. I think let's put it out there as that, and let's see what they come back with. But I'm fine, with them saying, well, you can't have the number be, more than 15% or whatever it is when you do the rounding. But, and by the same token, we can't have it be, when they round down, have it be less than 10%.
Yeah, I think we leave it in and let the chips fall where they may. Like I said, I can't imagine them saying no to that, so. Is that the general consensus? Nod your heads, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Well, I'm looking at the numbers there. I'm trying to think of a scenario that Eric just mentioned where even if we keep the language that's here, and somebody decides to build 10 units. Can you see the calculator on the screen, by the way?
Yes, we can, yep.
And they're, this would get rounded down to 1, so then you'd be at 10%. If somebody did, so the only scenario you'd be
9.
right, so you only had 9. And still, what if you had 11? So you had 1 out of right. So if it was 1 out of 11, then you'd be at 9%.
Yep, or 12.
Now that would get rounded up. Although I say greater or equal to.
Well, yep. So it's just it's that 11.
So 12.5% of housing use.
But again, if they're trying to create affordable housing,
Yeah, to Chaz's point, what if you had
Anything-
all fractions rounded up and we started the conversation there?
yeah, any fractional unit should be rounded up. Then we're golden. We don't lose any of our possible 40B number, and
I'm good with being, more aggressive at this draft stage to
yeah.
sit there and say, that way we don't have to worry about some of the cutesy things that might happen. You sit there and say, look,
Yeah, and I think you're making an honest effort to, you're not just throwing something out there to, try to stump EOHLC or have a requirement, an affordability requirement that's going to discourage the development. You have it at 12.5%, which is, just above the required 10%. And it's going to catch, I think, having that 12.5% or the extra 2.5% may, catch these kind of the issues that with, 11 units, where the cumulative that may, may wash any effect that, rounding down would have.
Okay. Well, let's see what they have to say on that one.
All right.
So move on.
Yep, that'll be an interesting discussion. They've definitely spent a lot of time talking about it already. At the state level. All right, site plans that show the position, how to track bedroom mix. Okay. In site plan review requirements, at least in the draft that I still have to suggest that we publish for the developer market, floor plans is a component that we ask for to be delivered. So if they didn't have floor plans, they'd have to ask for a waiver from that application component. So generally speaking, I would say we're in pretty good shape with regards to trying to figure out the bedroom mix. And I think you want to try to avoid incorporating language into the zoning bylaw that gives any hint or gives the appearance to the state that you're trying to manipulate the number of bedrooms in the units, when I really know what you're actually trying to figure out parking, and you're trying to figure out the overall impact of the, the development itself. I get it. And I think it's appropriate questions during site plan review, but I think having it listed specifically in the zoning raises eyebrows at the state level that we probably don't want. I don't think it introduces or eliminates any liability for the community.
So in other words, it's something that when the site plan comes through to the planning board can certainly ask and require that we see floor plans in order to approve the project. So
Yep.
I'm all right with leaving it at that.
We could add language, let's see here. So one of the things that Mike did add was to specify that conceptual floor plans showing approximate dimensions of units, circulation, number of bedrooms and bathrooms, common areas, and shared amenities be included. I think it kind of covers a large portion of that versus just saying we need to know the bedroom mix.
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
Great. I like that.
Very good. And I think that brings us through all the comments that Chaz reviewed with me.
Eric, I did have one more, that we had kind of gone over, and I don't remember what we decided on it. It was on page 8. I'm looking for the number now. In G, general development standards, number 6, where it talks about buildings with shared outdoor space.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I remember what you said.
So one of the things that kind of bothered me about this one is it includes rooftops and terraces. And if we're going to try and encourage people to put solar on the rooftops of these buildings, I don't want them including it as outdoor space or open space. So I'd like to remove rooftop and terrace out of there.
I don't know if we already did that. Like I
Yeah.
thought it either made sense and I either removed it. Was that a comment that we had processed, Mike?
Yeah, I know I made a comment that rooftop common spaces or outdoor space for open spaces is really more geared towards urban settings where there might, your lot coverage might be, more like 80%, and there might not be room on the lot to have that kind of space. So given the districts that have been selected, I don't see that being an issue.
And terrace, Mike, do you want to leave that in there?
I
mean,
could go either way.
I think terraces are more private entrances than. I mean, I view a terrace as being like a balcony or something like that.
Yeah, it would have to be in a
area.
common space, a common for all residents, so it couldn't just be like a balcony off of a private unit.
So picture a development, Chaz, where you've got like a first floor foyer, if you will, or some sort of gathering area that's open space.
Yep.
But the lot drops off in the back, so now you've got a terrace that overlooks it. They don't have to exclude the terrace area from their open space calcs.
Okay. I see that. All right.
All right.
Did anybody else have any other comments that they would want to discuss about this before we wrap up this piece of the meeting? All right, seeing none. Let's move on to our next agenda item, which is briefly review a list of additional potential zoning amendments to prioritize.
I'm gonna
Mike,
sign off.
yeah,
Thanks. It's a pleasure working with you guys.
Thanks so much
Thanks,
for all your
Mike.
help on this, Mike.
Appreciate that, Mike.
Really appreciate it. Yep.
Take care.
So, Mr. Chair, just want to make sure that moving on to the second agenda item means that there are no objections from any of the zoning review committee members present for submitting this draft bylaw to the state for their 90-day review tomorrow, correct?
I say yes. Should we make it a formal vote?
That'd be good. Go ahead. Since the select board did it yesterday, why not have the zoning review committee
Okay.
here voice their opinion?
I'm looking for a motion then.
Mr. Chair, I move that the zoning review committee approve the draft submission as presented this evening and direct Mr. Salerno to submit it on our behalf.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
All right, all in favor, signal by saying aye.
I think we gotta do a roll
Aye.
call. I think we gotta do a roll call.
Oh, roll call. All right, roll call. Eric Eldridge,
In favor?
Joe,
In favor?
Larry.
In favor.
I am also in favor. So Eric, you have your marching orders.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, so next on the agenda. Well, I'll turn this back over to you, Eric, and let you run through these. I know we have some recommendations that we need to have done, so.
Yeah, let me share a screen. It might help with regards to the conversation. It'll also help with folks who are following along if they choose to watch the recording. So let me just share.
Yep,
my
great.
So you should be able to see item 3 from the agenda that was published. There's quite a few things. I don't necessarily think that you have to tackle 100% of them for spring town meeting, but while it's a long list, there's probably quite a few that are relatively low hanging fruit that could be addressed. The ones that are under the AG's recommendations, I think should be non-negotiable. We need to show the best possible effort to get as many of those addressed as possible. Is there anybody that's not familiar with the 4 items that I've listed here? I'll briefly describe them. As we know, we've had previous discussions about the town meeting approval requirement that is incorporated early on in the language for our current multifamily housing development bylaw, as well as the town's open space residential development bylaw. And the AG's office confirmed what Barrett Planning Group had advised the committee about, is that it's not compliant with the Fair Housing Act, and was recommended that that requirement be removed. So that should be a pretty easy amendment for us to put together. It's simply to strike one line from each one of those bylaws and should bring us into compliance with the AG. Other prohibitions, they had some comments about not allowing solid waste disposal anywhere in town, as well as correctional facilities. You could potentially leave those alone and wait for, it's technically, it is what it is until it gets challenged legally. I probably don't want to be quoted saying that. But if we open up the table of uses, correctional facilities are listed on our governmental institutional public service uses, and it's prohibited everywhere. Actually, it's allowed by special permit from the select board in the industrial district. Let me just see if I can pull up what they have to say about the correctional facilities.
Said in the industrial district.
Where did they want it?
All right. So their comments were that the table states that correctional facilities are allowed by special permit in the I-1 industrial district and prohibited in all others. The town must apply these use provisions consistent with the town's limited authority to regulate federal and state entities, including prisons and correctional institutions. A municipality's authority to regulate federal and state entities is limited. They reference another court case. Municipalities may not regulate federal and state governmental entities in a manner that impedes their purpose. And I think that's fine. The question is, is there such a thing as a private correctional facility? I mean, I know I read a lot about privately operated correctional facilities, but are they just operated that way, and they're federally owned, or it's not 100% clear to me.
Well, and then the question is whether that's allowed in the Commonwealth.
I'm sorry, say that
Right.
again?
The question is whether that's allowed in the Commonwealth, because there are private correctional facilities in some places, but I don't know that they exist here.
Okay. The recommendation there was that the town should consult with town council regarding the proper application of its special permit requirement and prohibition of correctional facilities that could be owned and operated by the federal and state government. So again, I mean, these are all items that I'll be trying to get addressed with town council and see what language makes sense. And I'll bring them back to the zoning review committee. There were some additional table of use adjustments that they had mentioned with regards to being applied consistently. I'll schedule a meeting with town council, go over those and see which items need to be brought to the committee. And then lastly, there are marijuana buffer zones and distances that have been defined by the Cannabis Control Commission since the town of Tyngsborough published its own, or at least interpreted what the Cannabis Control Commission was insinuating, or at least advising when the town passed its bylaw. And it probably makes sense to amend them so that they are in direct compliance, or at least agreement with the Cannabis Control Commission's language. It's really not any different than what the town has. For folks that might be listening to the recording of this, I'll go over it briefly, just so folks know. So in the Attorney General's feedback from our recodified zoning bylaw, they provided some commentary about the special requirements for licensed marijuana establishments. They reiterated what the town is currently stating, and the town should consult with town council on the proper measurement of the buffer zone from a school use. As to the other uses that have buffer requirements, for marijuana use, we encourage the town to consult with town council regarding the application of the buffer zone requirements between a marijuana establishment and other uses. General laws, chapter 94G, section 3 prohibits a town from adopting bylaws that are, quote, unreasonably impracticable, I agree, or in conflict with 94G or the CCC, Cannabis Control Commission regulations. So generally speaking, we just need to go back to the CCC regulations and ensure that we're not making it any more difficult to do those measurements and or define those buffer zones. It's still 500 feet. It's not making it possible to move anything closer together. It's really just getting the language to agree.
Yeah, if you could consult with town council and let us get back to us on those, that'd be great, Eric.
Sure. Interestingly enough, I do want to point out it actually moves some of those. Entities further apart, since the CCC's regulations provide that the buffer zone is measured from the geometric center of an entrance, not the nearest point of a property line or the building. So technically those distances would grow a little bit further based on the current language that the town has.
But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, I think what we're looking at is that the AG provided a comprehensive review of our bylaws and identified some areas that could be in conflict with either state law or federal law. And your question is whether we should prioritize cleaning those up, the ones that we're going to clean up, because like the slaughterhouses and some of those others, I mean, yeah, okay. I don't know that that's really going to be something that's there, but work with council and get those addressed as part of what we're going to do in May. Correct?
Correct.
Because I'm on board. I'm totally on board with that one.
Yeah, we want our bylaws compliant with state and federal law. So yeah, that's a priority.
Eric, I have a question. Did the numbers of the distances change or just the location to measure them?
The locations to measure them.
Okay, so in other words, we were compliant with the state at the time where it said corner of, edge of the property to edge of property. We actually changed it to edge of building to edge of building. We have a situation where we were very close on a second location. I was just wondering if it's going to be changed now to main entrance, could alleviate that situation.
I believe, and I think town council would concur that because the special permit was issued with the current language in place and the way it was measured and determined, by retroactively, or moving forward by correcting the language that's in your bylaw to match the CCC's regulations moving forward. I don't think it would retroactively change or negate the special permit itself because of the date of when the amendment was, when the zoning bylaw was amended. Does that make sense?
I read you, yeah.
And
Yeah,
in this,
so if that special permit expired and a new one had to come about, it would have to comply.
Very good.
and I think, Joe, that the way the current second location is set up, it'll actually be further away if it's measured from door to door, which is kind of what the new recommendation is, or
That was my idea, exactly. Yep.
yeah. So I think we're fine no matter what.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks for clarifying that, Jess. Sorry, I didn't understand your point, Joe. I've answered your question in.
I was trying to keep it as general as possible without giving out.
Yep,
too many
thank you.
details.
All right, so I will continue to work on those. It'll probably be a relatively long period of silence because it's going to take town council a while to dig through those. I'm hoping that they come back with relatively comprehensive recommendations that can just turn into warrant articles after some review by the committee and the planning board and get those incorporated into a public hearing. I did tell residents of certain parcels along Kendall Road who approached me before the last town meeting, before a special town meeting, to consider rezoning many of their parcels from residential district to either I-1 or some business district. Let me see if I can pull up a quick map. I can either search for that file, or I can quickly highlight those parcels on my browser. Let me just do that. It's probably faster for me to just pull up the browser. Right, and we are looking at
Down a little bit more. No, going the wrong way. A little bit more to the right. Oh, okay, yep. There you go.
I think it's that, because I think this little piece is connected to this parcel, and I don't think that was included. But these are the parcels that have been suggested. And let me turn on the zoning. All right, so you can see that just about all those parcels are, this one up here is a split lot. It's got some residential and industrial on it. These 7 or 8 are all R1 residential district. And then this parcel is listed as a B3. So I thought that today would be a good opportunity to have some discussion and or debate about your receptiveness to this, whether you think it's appropriate to change those districts to an industrial district if they need to remain residential for whatever reason, or if it's an opportunity to consider like a B3 shopping district. My personal opinion as a planner, I think it does represent some opportunities for an industrial rezone. Certainly for the ones on the north side of Kendall Road, I'm a little less optimistic about redevelopment opportunities along the smaller parcels on the south side of Kendall Road.
And you've been approached by all of these people to do this?
Correct. So I believe Dick Choate was the person that had approached me. I don't want to falsely identify him as the person whose idea it was. I know that he had some conversations with his neighbors. and he had volunteered to bring the request to the planning office, and I offered to, facilitate those discussions with the zoning review committee as well as the planning board, so that if we can get common support for it, we can introduce an article to town meeting without a petition. So it could be an article that's proposed by the planning board, which makes it just a little bit easier. But they did provide me with a signature sheet with signatures from every property owner that I've highlighted here in their support for a rezone.
So it would take 10 signatures for them to bring this to town meeting, correct?
I think it would take more than that. I'd have to look.
No, 10,
It's
Okay.
10,
spring
10
is
for a
10.
regular.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Regular town meeting is just 10 signatures.
I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I would feel more comfortable if, in fact, we had, I mean, you've already got 8 people on there. They just need 2 more to bring this forward to town meeting.
The other thing you could do, so it doesn't, it doesn't preclude you from helping them to, message it, have the language be appropriate so that because whatever needs to be done, sometimes with citizens petitions, they're not quite worded correctly. So that it doesn't preclude you from doing that. But if the planning board wasn't comfortable in doing that, because I mean, if I'm them, I might be worried about, everybody coming up and saying, hey, I want to rezone this, and it might set, a precedent. But it could be something where a citizen's petition like that would make sense. I personally don't know enough about what the impact would be of changing that, with buildings already on there, and what the impact would be to neighbors and all the other things as well, because it's not just the people who are there, it's the people that abut them that are impacted. So, my take on it is that I don't know that we would want to push that at this point, unless, you had some sort of a project that, was ready to go, and this could hold up that, that type of thing. But if just there's 8 people that are sitting there saying, hey, we'd like to rezone where our property is, I think it's a little bit more involved than that, and they should really go through the planning board and others to make sure we get all of our bases covered on that, rather than just this group.
Exactly. I also didn't want to put the residents in the position that, like you had said, they simply say, here's a citizen's petition to rezone these, whatever, 8 parcels to the I-1 district, and that's it. Versus a more nuanced conversation from an economic development perspective. And, board members like yourselves, members of other boards that have now volunteered for the zoning review committee could look at this and say, well, is it more creative or an option to say that the north side of the Kendall Road area would be an industrial district and the properties on the south side would be B3? Does that make sense? These are all things, all questions I think that help the community determine what the best zoning application would be there. Or does it, like I said, remain residential?
I think it's interesting. I don't know that we're going to have, I guess my concern would be if we're going to tackle all those other things where we've got to clean up our bylaws, we've got to get MBTA communities. Is this something that we need to tackle in May? I don't get the sense from this that it's something that's causing some immediate pain and is impeding something that's imminent. It sounds like it's, yeah, we'd like to have that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't consider it. I just think it's something that's going to require a little bit more work than just this group between now and May in order to give it its due diligence.
Can I offer the opportunity for an invitation to those residents to participate in one of the zoning review committee's subsequent meetings between now and February? Like, I guess that would be January. It's already December. So sometime in January or February?
My opinion is, and I think this is kind of what Eric was saying, we got bigger fish to fry than worried about than rezoning this for them. I think that it really, they should be the ones pushing this, not us.
Oh, they are. They were simply trying to be as respectful, I think, as possible to the planning board and anybody else. I don't think they wanted to come up with a citizens petition without getting input and feedback from staff and board members within the town and the community.
Well, if that's the case, then I think that maybe we should put a spot on the planning board for it and have them come speak to the planning board directly if they want the planning board to be the one that's gonna sponsor this zoning change.
Sure, that's perfectly fine. I'd be happy to follow up with them with that.
And that's just my opinion. I think it should, I don't think it should be under the purview of this committee, because we're really reviewing our bylaws and trying to fix them, not rezone a parcel in town.
Great point. Okay.
All right, next
Does
one
anybody
down.
disagree?
Oh, yeah, okay. Joe, Larry, any input?
No comment on that one.
Larry? You're muted, buddy.
You're
still
muted.
I'm sorry. I have dogs here. I didn't want barking on the meeting. Mr. Chairman, I think you're on point with what you've said. I agree with you.
Thank you very much. All right, next one, consider adding continued care campus use to B2 district and a minimum lot size for 84 Kendall Road. Is this something that's come across your desk to try and do this, Eric, or what's the story on this one?
That's correct. So we haven't heard or received any continuing care campus applications since passing that zoning bylaw for the B3 district. And the town does have a large parcel at 84 Kendall that could potentially offer an opportunity for the development or the use of that zoning bylaw. And it was something that I wanted to bring up to the zoning review committee. Obviously, this is something that would ultimately, all of your zoning amendments have to ultimately go through the planning board, I understand. But considering that it's a review of our existing zoning bylaw for continuing care campus and where it is applied, is it something that you feel like could represent a good development and community addition with a small change?
Have you had any interest in this particular location?
I have received inquiries and feedback that said that they wanted to consider pursuing developers that could offer a continuing care campus use, but currently it's a moot point since it's not allowed in that district.
Again, I think this is something really for the planning board to look at. If we would be to sponsor this, I mean, that piece of property is currently in forestry. It's what, 26, 27 acres. We're talking about
Yes.
lot size. I mean, how big do they want? What kind of area do they need? I know it's primarily ledge over there. I'm very familiar with it as I live right around the corner. I think it would be a nice spot for that because you would have beautiful views of the pond. But I would want a lot more information than just to say, yeah, we should be taking this on. I really think that maybe it could go before the planning board.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think it falls just like you said in the last one, right? The purview of this committee is really to look at our zoning bylaws and what changes should be made. I think individual parcels and whether there should be adjustments with where they fit. I think that's better suited in the planning board.
Okay.
Problem?
I'm sure Joe, you and Larry are on board with that too.
Agreed.
Joe, yep, okay. All right, improvements to inclusionary zoning. Now we're back where we belong. Go ahead,
Okay.
Eric, what do you got for this one?
Sure. So while I review the language, the inclusionary zoning bylaw has been the same since I started with the town a little over 5 years ago. And when I first started, I paid a close attention to the payment in lieu options that I feel like provide a loophole for developers that might not necessarily be in the best interest for the community. And I was going to suggest potentially closing those so that either not necessarily eliminating a payment in lieu, but something that would be more appropriate so that the Affordable Housing Trust had a better chance at creating the affordable housing units that it would be intended for, and or ensure that developers incorporated affordable units into their development itself. So it's not a complete overhaul. It's really a matter of ensuring that the affordable housing units that the bylaw is intended to create, actually do get created.
Yep, I'm on board with that one.
Totally agree.
Okay, yep, let's keep that on our list. Sign regulations.
Yeah, I think this is a larger project, and this is one where I would recommend that, the zoning review committee continue to engage with Barrett Planning Group. I'd probably go back to them and say, look, I wanted to get some confirmation with the zoning review committee that is something you'd like me to prioritize with Barrett Planning Group, to say our sign regulations are, I don't want to call them a complete, mess, but they are difficult to process because there are so many pages and it's broken down into district, and then it references another district, meaning, hey, it's the same as this one plus these other things. It could be consolidated into a chart without changing a thing. It could be consolidated and be made much easier to use. But if it gets consolidated and much easier to use, it also provides the zoning review committee an opportunity to look at it and say, is there sections or areas that you'd like to actually edit to be more convenient for the business community?
Joe, I'll look to you to comment on this one.
We've been looking for something like that for a while now, and we'd definitely like to contribute to that. It seems like we usually have a lot of problems or a lot of issues with new businesses and existing businesses that may revamp their style or whatever, and we always run into a problem with this.
Do you think a good goal for that would be to try to prepare it for the fall?
That would probably be a little bit of a stretch goal, but it would be definitely worthwhile.
Hoping it's not too optimistic, since it's December now. You'd have 10 months for Barrett Planning Group hopefully to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of reorganizing it and getting it consolidated first.
Well, the only thing I would caution is that so remember the way that we get these things done is we go through plenty of iterations. They take a first stab, we socialize it, go through a bunch of iterations, and then we need to make sure that once we come to the final recommendation, that we communicate it well to residents. And sign bylaws is one of those ones that I think people are going to have a keen interest in. So let's make sure that we have enough time to properly educate them as to exactly what is changing. So, I agree with what Joe said. It's optimistic. It would be worthwhile. Maybe that's what we start with, and let's see what it would be, but let's find out from Barrett whether they have the capacity to do it in a timely manner, and then whether we can get all of the other things done to make sure that residents are well informed and can adequately approve it. It's one of those things where if they're unclear on anything, it gets to be a mess, and we don't want this to be one that we have to go back to the table a couple times. So while I think we want to go quickly on it, I don't think we want to rush it such that we don't do it well.
Understood.
Yep, and agreed. Move farmers markets and farm stands to general license instead of SP.
This was a comment that I thought made a lot of sense. I think it had come from the zoning review committee when they were looking at what was required for special permits. And I think somebody had suggested, why aren't farmers markets and farm stands just a general license that the administration can issue from the town manager's office? And I wanted to check if the zoning review committee still agreed with that, and if they wanted me to check in, I guess, with the select board and or the administrative office to see if that's where they'd like to go. And then we can potentially just draft a very simple amendment that simply said that's what was required.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. So it would move to selectman approval then, or
No, but well, I mean, it's up-
Manager.
town
I
manager?
think administratively, it's a lot easier to just have that approved through the town manager's office. But if you still felt like, well, farm stands and farmers markets can be pretty big, maybe it's not a special permit hearing, which certainly seems inappropriate, right? You don't want to advertise and pay for notifications, which currently is what is required. But if you still felt like it was important for them to appear before the select board, or the planning board for that matter, you can do that. I'm just trying to make it as easy as possible for these folks.
Yeah, I'd be happy with the town manager handling all that.
Colin would love it.
Yeah, exactly. Since he's not here to protest.
I think we should investigate it, right?
Yeah.
You know, I think to your point, Eric, it might be that we sit there and say, look, for farm stands and farmers markets of X size, it's an administrative thing that goes for the town manager.
Great
Anything
point.
greater than that, we could sit there and say, have it come before the select board for approval, but not necessarily the full special permit process. And we can look to see what other towns do on that, but the current process is probably overkill, because I think we ran into it most recently in the early fall.
Yep. All right, understood.
All right,
Is this
EV
down to the next
requirements
one?
and or, I'm sorry, any more conversation on that?
Nope.
EV requirements and or delivery truck spaces for parking areas. Eric, what do you get on that one?
Right, so I think this keeps coming up, and I think even when I had written up this agenda, it was before even I had realized the 20% requirement in the stretch building code for EV parking spaces, which I think is, miles ahead of where we are today. Then in terms of delivery truck spaces, it was a component that the zoning review committee brought up with regards to our the MBTA communities bylaw. And I thought it might have been something that you wanted to look into. Is it something that should be incorporated into the parking requirements of the general zoning bylaw?
So in other words, a business would have X number of parking spots. And they might have 2 or 3 delivery trucks using those spots. Is that what we're getting at?
I was thinking of it more for multifamily, like for dwelling uses where you have more than, let's just say more than 3 dwelling units. You have to have a space for a delivery truck to get in there. Or I don't know, you pick a limit. I don't think I was as concerned for commercial or retail use, because in order for those businesses to get their goods in, they have to make room for those trucks. I think that's pretty well taken care of. I think what we haven't seen is zoning bylaws haven't received updates since the incredible explosion of deliveries that are being made from online orders. And the question is, are developments taking that into consideration, and should zoning bylaws acknowledge that need?
So my experience is if they're here a minute, I'd be surprised. It seems to be dropping off parcels happens pretty quickly. I don't know that we really need to create a bylaw for that at this point in time. That's just off the top of my head. Anybody else?
But then in MBTA, where you have a high density of housing and a delivery may have to go up multi-floors on an elevator, They may be more than a minute, and they may be doing multiple locations within that building.
Yeah.
So having a dedicated area near the main entrance may be appropriate.
Is that something we can do in site plan review for those facilities? Because I mean, I think probably to Chaz's point, do we really need it across the board, or is this something that's very specific to, certain types of building structures and locations? So I don't know the answer to that. I'm floating it out there as a question. Could we do that
I
as
mean,
part of site plan review?
it can be addressed in site plan review, but you can't guarantee that they'd be compliant. And I don't think it would be something that the courts would look at a denial because you didn't have a truck drop off. So, if it's not important enough to codify in your zoning bylaw, that's fine. It can continue to be something that gets addressed at the site plan review process. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. If it does because they're trying to accommodate the request, great. The planning board's probably not reviewing dozens or even, more than 3 applications or 2 applications a year that would require this type of design component. So it's not going to be a repetitive thing where we'd say, look, we're tired of getting all these applications without this thing. Put it in the zoning bylaw so we get it the way it's supposed to. We're not at that point. I just wanted to bring it up because I thought it was a good observation with regards to different types of development trends.
Are other towns doing this?
I don't know. I can't say yes or no.
All right. Well, I think we're looking at something that we can maybe not necessarily have to focus on for spring or fall town meeting at this point. Unless, Joe, you agree with me and you feel passionately about this. To your point of, yes, parking and being there for a while to do multiple deliveries. I agree with you there, but do we really need a designated spot? So,
Well, we have the designated spots now for EVs in the MBTA community wording, right?
yeah.
Right.
So
So do you
So
want?
I guess my point, let's just use Flint's Corner as an example, right? So if we were expecting 96 units at Flint's Corner, I don't think during the 2 site plans that the planning board reviewed, I don't know if delivery truck areas were taken into consideration. They could be the next time a site plan is brought to the planning board. And I can also send out a quick message to other planners that I know in other communities just to see if anybody else has tried to address this. So for now, we can table it. I'll see what I can find. If I do find something great and useful, I'll bring it back to you.
okay.
Great. Battery storage systems.
This is one item that I can say for certain other communities are addressing. So there are a handful that have recently passed zoning bylaws that address regulations, mostly around fire safety for battery energy storage systems, which are becoming more and more commonly applied for or requested by either developers or businesses in communities. And it becomes a challenge for communities to figure out what's appropriate and how do we respond to this and where should they be located? Do they need to be a certain setback from lot lines? Are there certain areas where they're not appropriate? Are there certain design features that are necessary that the fire department is requiring or recommending be in the zoning bylaw? And I feel like we could potentially utilize Medways as a good starting point. I did review that one, and I want to say Drake recently incorporated some language into their zoning bylaws addressing this, but I didn't think it was nearly as thorough as Medways.
So
Mr.
you
Chair,
found,
I think we should be moving forward with that category and addressing those issues.
okay.
Yeah, I think it's something we should get ahead of. I don't know how long it would take. I do think that while it's great that Medway has something, we can certainly use that as a model, but we do want to make sure that we're connecting in with fire and what their thoughts. I'm sure Chief Russell has some thoughts on this one, and see if we can get ahead of that. I guess the question is that something that we would have to get in place for May, or is that something where we should continue to work on it and get it right, and then be in a position that whichever meeting we can get it in, we get it in.
If the zoning review committee members felt like it was an important topic, which it sounds like most of you do, I can bring the Medway example and have it reviewed. I can review it with the fire chief and the deputy fire chief, see what they think. If they also think it's a priority item and feel like, you know, there's only minor adjustments that they would recommend, I'll bring it back to the zoning review committee and see where it fits into your schedule.
That sounds good to me. When you get
Great.
that, can you just shoot that over to me, Eric? I'd like to take a look at it.
Sure.
Thank you. All right, anybody else have anything that's not on this list that they think we should prioritize? Okay, I'll take that as a no. When do we want to meet again? I know we had picked out the second Tuesday of the month to do that.
January
Right.
9th, right? I think I got something in an email
Yeah,
today on that.
I did create a recurring calendar event in the Tyngsborough important dates for the second Tuesday of each month for this committee. Yeah, I can obviously adjust it if you'd like.
I'm not going to be available January 9th. I'm going to have my other cataract done that day, and based on the last one, I know I'll be junked that night, so. So we just the following one, the 16th.
Let's see.
Oh, Chaz, aren't you on the master plan implementation committee? At least I see it on a potential date for that.
Yeah, I don't think that has not been confirmed though.
Okay.
So I can let, I mean, I think this is, well, they're both very important, but the master plan hasn't met in a while, so I think that shifting that off a few days one way or the other won't matter unless the 23rd is better for everyone. I think Tuesdays are better because theoretically Jeremy can be here, although he did get back to me and say that he had something else going on tonight that.
I can't do the 23rd.
Well, let's shoot. Let's go for the 16th, and I'll tell Colin that we're not going to meet on the 16th then.
Would you like me to keep the other remaining the other remaining second Tuesdays as a placeholder?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, the one on the 9th has been moved to the 16th.
All right. So 16th. Come on, Ben. All right, we'll do it just like we're doing at the Zoom meeting at 6 o'clock. Sounds good. With that, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining.